Dr. Gray stood at the observation window of Earth's orbital station, his silver eyes reflecting the blue planet below. His long fingers moved quickly across his datapad as he recorded yet another puzzling human behavior. These creatures never seemed to do what he expected them to do. In the recreation area behind him, two humans were engaged in what they called laughter. The sound still made him uncomfortable. On his world, such uncontrolled displays of emotion were seen as signs of illness or distress. Yet here, it was normal, even encouraged. The humans, both maintenance workers, had just finished their shift. Instead of going directly to their rest periods as any logical being would, they stayed to share what they called jokes. Dr. Gray had spent 3 weeks on the station, and he still couldn't understand why beings would waste energy on such pointless activities. A light flashed on his communication device. The station commander wanted to see him. Dr. Gray straightened his plain gray uniform and headed to the command center, passing more humans in the corridors. Some nodded at him. Others smiled. One even waved. All these unnecessary gestures of acknowledgement. His species would never waste time on such things. The command center doors slid open with a soft hiss. Commander Marcus sat at his desk, looking over reports on his screen. Without looking up, he gestured to a chair. "Have a seat, Doctor. I'll be with you in a moment." Dr. Gray sat stiffly, noting how the commander multitasked, another inefficient human trait. On his world, tasks were completed one at a time, in order of importance. "So," Commander Marcus finally said, looking up with what Dr. Gray had learned to identify as a friendly expression, "how's our resident alien anthropologist finding life among the humans?" "Confusing," Dr. Gray admitted. "Your species continues to defy logical analysis." The commander laughed. There was that sound again. "Well, that's kind of our specialty, isn't it? Breaking the rules of logic." "Just this morning," Dr. Gray continued, "I observed Engineer Parker deliberately make a mistake while teaching a junior technician. When I tried to correct him, he said he was teaching through error. How can incorrect information be educational?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Ah, the old learn from your mistakes method. Sometimes the best way to understand why something works is to see how it fails." Dr. Gray's antenna twitched in confusion. "But failure is undesirable." "Is it?" Marcus smiled. "Some of humanity's greatest discoveries came from failures. Did you know we discovered one of our most important medicines because a scientist failed to clean his Petri dishes properly?" Dr. Gray added this to his notes. "Humans seem to find success in the most illogical places. Perhaps that was why his people's High Council had sent him here." Humans, despite their emotional nature and apparent inefficiency, had achieved space travel in a fraction of the time it had taken his species. A sudden alarm blared through the station. Red lights flashed. Dr. Gray's antenna stood straight up in alarm, but he noticed Commander Marcus remained calm, merely pressing a button on his console. "Status report," Marcus ordered. "Minor pressure fluctuation in Section C," the voice responded. "Maintenance team already responding." "Keep me updated," Marcus said, then turned back to Dr. Gray, as if nothing had happened. "You see, Doctor, humans don't just survive chaos. We thrive in it. It's in our nature to face the unexpected." Dr. Gray looked at his datapad, then at the commander, then at the now quiet alarm lights. In 15 minutes, he had witnessed inefficiency, illogical teaching methods, and a calm response to potential danger. None of it made sense by his species' standards. Yet somehow, it all worked. These emotional, unpredictable beings had built this station, reached the stars, and were now teaching other species new ways of thinking. Maybe that was what could be said of humans. They didn't just break the rules of logic. They showed that sometimes the rules themselves needed breaking. The accident happened during what humans called their night shift. Dr. Gray was in his observation post, watching the skeleton crew perform their duties, when the station shuddered. His sensitive antenna detected a change in air pressure moments before the emergency alarms began to sound. Hull breach in Laboratory Section F. The computer announced. Emergency protocols activated. Dr. Gray watched in fascination as the humans responded. On his world, such a crisis would trigger an immediate evacuation. The logical response would be to seal off the damaged section and preserve the rest of the facility. But humans, as he was learning, rarely did the logical thing. Engineer Parker's voice crackled over the comm system. 3 researchers trapped in Lab F7. Main access is blocked by debris. We need options, people. Dr. Gray moved closer to the observation window. The humans weren't running away. Instead, they were running toward the danger. Commander Marcus appeared beside him, already suited up in emergency gear. Doctor. Marcus nodded. Care to observe human crisis response up close? Before Dr. Gray could explain how that would violate his non-interference protocols, Marcus tossed him a suit. Sometimes the best data comes from being in the middle of things. 5 minutes later, Dr. Gray found himself following Marcus through the emergency access tunnels. Ahead of them, maintenance crews were already cutting through panels to create a new path to the lab. The trapped researchers had only 30 minutes of emergency air supply. Impossible, Dr. Gray said, checking his readings. The structural damage is too severe. Even if we reach them, the chances of a successful rescue are less than 12.4%. Never tell humans the odds, Marcus replied, helping a crew member position cutting equipment. We tend to take it as a challenge. Dr. Gray watched in amazement as the humans worked. They seemed to communicate without words, anticipating each other's needs. When one approach failed, they immediately tried another. There was no time wasted on blame or discussion, just constant, relentless action. Found a way through, someone shouted, but the gap's too small for the rescue team. Dr. Gray analyzed the situation. The opening was indeed too narrow for a human to pass through, but his species was naturally more flexible. The logical choice would be to. He surprised himself by speaking. I can fit. Every human turned to look at him. Commander Marcus raised an eyebrow. Thought you were just here to observe, Doctor. Dr. Gray's antenna twitched. I am adapting to local problem-solving methods. A smile spread across Marcus's face. Well then, let's get you geared up. Minutes later, Dr. Gray squeezed through the gap, dragging emergency supplies behind him. The trapped researchers were huddled in a sealed corner of the lab, their air running low. When they saw him, they didn't show fear at his alien appearance. Instead, they immediately helped him set up the emergency equipment. Working together, they established a temporary airlock. Within 20 minutes, all 3 researchers were safely extracted through the newly cut rescue route. As medical teams checked the survivors, Dr. Gray stood back, processing what he had witnessed. These humans had faced what his species would consider certain death. The logical course would have been to accept the loss. Instead, they had improvised, adapted, and succeeded through sheer determination. Pretty impressive for a bunch of illogical beings, huh? Marcus said, appearing beside him. Dr. Gray looked at his data pad, then at the celebrating rescue crew. I am beginning to suspect, he said slowly, that there are different kinds of logic. The kind that accepts limitations, and the kind that refuses to recognize them at all. Marcus patted him on the shoulder. Another unnecessary human gesture that, strangely, didn't seem so unnecessary anymore. Welcome to humanity's school of thought, Doctor. Lesson 1. The impossible just takes a little longer. Dr. Gray set up his testing equipment in the station's recreational area, ignoring the curious glances from passing crew members. After witnessing the rescue operation, he had decided to conduct proper scientific trials of human problem-solving abilities. Commander Marcus had approved, though his expression suggested he found something amusing about the whole thing. The first test subject was Engineer Parker. Dr. Gray presented him with a puzzle box from his homeworld. It had taken his species 3 generations to create a mathematical formula to solve it. He activated his recording devices and prepared to document what would likely be hours of frustrated attempts. Parker turned the box over in his hands twice, then dropped it on the floor. Dr. Gray's antenna shot up in alarm. The test has not yet begun. The box bounced, and something clicked. It popped open. Parker grinned. These old maintenance panels on the station do the same thing. Sometimes you need a good bump to realign the locking mechanism. He picked up the box and handed it back to the stunned alien. Dr. Gray made a note. Humans apply previous unrelated experiences to new problems in unexpected ways. The next test involved Medical Officer Turner. Dr. Gray presented her with a complex ethical scenario used to test young members of his species. It involved choosing between saving one critically injured patient with a 95% survival chance or attempting to save 5 patients with only 20% survival chances each. Turner listened to the scenario, then asked, "Who says we can't save them all?" "The parameters of the test." "Parameters change," Turner interrupted. "We can stabilize the critical patient first, buying time to work on the others. We can call in off-duty staff. We can improvise with available resources." She leaned forward. "The real test isn't about choosing who lives or dies. It's about finding ways to avoid making that choice at all." More notes. Humans refuse to accept limitations of theoretical scenarios. They alter the parameters to create new possibilities. The third test was meant to be simple. Dr. Gray gathered a group of crew members and gave them each a different colored piece of his testing equipment. The goal was to sort themselves by color wavelength without speaking. On his world, it was a basic exercise in logical organization. The humans turned it into what they called a game. They made exaggerated gestures, created impromptu sign language, and laughed at their mistakes. Somehow, they not only completed the task but formed new social bonds in the process. "Fascinating," Dr. Gray muttered, recording more notes. "They convert simple organizational tasks into opportunities for social interaction." As the days passed, his test subjects became more interested in his research. They asked questions about his world, his species, his own ways of thinking. He found himself sharing meals with them, an unnecessary social activity that, surprisingly, seemed to enhance his understanding of their responses. During one such meal, Commander Marcus asked to see his research notes. "Your methods are interesting," Marcus said after reading them. "But has it occurred to you that while you're studying us, we might be learning just as much about you?" Dr. Gray's antenna twitched. "I don't understand." "Every test you create shows us how your species thinks. Every time you're surprised by our solutions, we learn about your assumptions. It's a two-way street, Doctor." Dr. Gray looked around the dining area. Humans were eating, talking, laughing. All those inefficient behaviors. Yet in just a few weeks, they had solved puzzles his people had spent generations on, found ways around supposedly impossible scenarios, and turned simple tests into learning experiences for both species. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "that is the most important data point of all. Humans don't just solve problems. They transform them into opportunities for growth, not just for themselves, but for everyone around them." Marcus smiled. "Now that's what I call a breakthrough." He raised his cup in what humans called a toast. "To the scientific method, human style." Dr. Gray found himself lifting his cup as well, participating in yet another unnecessary human ritual that somehow felt entirely necessary. Dr. Gray stared at his reflection in the observation window, touching the small metal object akin to his uniform. The humans had given him what they called a badge, a symbol that he was now part of the station's crew rather than just an observer. The logical part of his mind said it was just a piece of metal. Yet every time he looked at it, he felt something unexpected. His data pad blinked with a message from his homeworld. The High Council wanted to know why his recent reports contained what they called emotional contamination. They reminded him that maintaining objective distance was crucial to scientific observation. A noise made him turn. Engineer Parker was teaching a group of junior crew members how to play something called poker. They waved for him to join them. 3 months ago, he would have declined, citing research protocols. Instead, he found himself walking over and taking the seat. "Fair warning, Doc," Parker grinned, dealing the cards. "We're playing for desert rations tonight." Dr. Gray studied his cards, remembering the rules from previous observations. "I believe the correct response is all in." The humans laughed, a sound that no longer made him uncomfortable. In fact, he had started to appreciate its various meanings: joy, surprise, friendship, even the strange thing they called getting the joke. Later that evening, having won 3 dessert rations, humans became predictably nervous when bluffing, a tell his antenna easily detected. Dr. Gray sat in the medical bay with Officer Turner. "Your heart rate is elevated," she noted during his routine health check, "and your antenna shows increased activity. Are you feeling okay?" Dr. Gray hesitated. "I believe I am experiencing what humans call happiness." Turner smiled, making a note in his medical file. "That's not a medical condition, you know. It's just part of living. On my world, we control such responses. They are seen as primitive, unnecessary." He looked at his badge again. "Yet I find myself experiencing them more frequently. And is that such a bad thing?" Turner asked, putting down her medical scanner. "Your species values efficiency, right? Well, emotions can be efficient too. They help us make quick decisions, form strong bonds, find creative solutions." The station's communication system crackled. "Medical team to Dock 3. Supply ship reporting multiple injuries from meteorite impact." Turner grabbed her emergency kit. Dr. Gray found himself following her without being asked. When they reached the dock, the scene was chaotic. The supply ship had limped in with severe damage, its crew battered but alive. Dr. Gray worked alongside the medical team, his natural ability to sense vital signs through his antenna proving unexpectedly useful. Hours passed in a blur of activity. When it was over, Turner found him sitting quietly in the observation room. "You did good work today," she said. "Those crewmen might not have made it without your help." "I violated my non-interference protocols," he replied. "I allowed emotional responses to override logical observation. And because of that, 3 people are alive who might have died." Turner sat beside him. "You know what I think? I think you're starting to understand that logic and emotion aren't opposites. They're 2 parts of the same whole." Dr. Gray looked at his data pad, still blinking with messages from the High Council. Then he looked at his badge, at the medical bay where the rescued crew rested, at the poker cards still scattered on a nearby table. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "that is what my people sent me to learn. Not just to observe humans, but to understand why they succeed. They don't just accept emotions, they harness them." Turner patted his shoulder, a gesture he had come to associate with friendship. "Sounds like you're becoming a bit human yourself, Doc." For the first time in his life, Dr. Gray didn't try to suppress the warm feeling those words created. Instead, he let himself experience it fully, adding it to his growing collection of very unscientific, very important discoveries about what it meant to be alive. The warning came at what humans called midnight. Dr. Gray was in the communications center when the long-range sensors detected the approaching ships. His antenna stiffened as he recognized their energy signatures: raiders, the space pirates that prey on research stations and cargo vessels. His fingers moved quickly across the console, sending an emergency message to his homeworld. The High Council's response was immediate and logical. "Evacuate immediately. Station defense probability 8.3%. Survival not worth the resource expenditure." Commander Marcus read the message over his shoulder. His face showed none of the fear Dr. Gray's species would expect in such a situation. Instead, there was something else: determination. "Well, Doctor," Marcus said, pressing the station-wide alert button, "looks like you're about to observe how humans handle impossible odds." The next hour was a blur of activity, but instead of evacuating, the humans were preparing. Engineer Parker and his team were modifying the station's shields. Medical Officer Turner was setting up emergency response areas. Even the kitchen staff were involved, moving supplies to secure locations. "This is illogical," Dr. Gray said, following Marcus through the corridors. "The Raiders have superior weapons. They outnumber us. The mathematical outcome is clear." "Math doesn't account for everything, Doctor." Marcus stopped at a control panel, bringing up the station's defense systems. "Sometimes the strongest weapon isn't firepower. It's the will to protect what matters." Dr. Gray's antenna twitched. "A High Council's assessment." "With all due respect to your council," Marcus interrupted, "they're not here. This station isn't just a research facility. It's our home. It's the first successful, long-term collaboration between our species. It's the future of human-alien relations, and we're not giving that up without a fight." The first attack came exactly as the calculations predicted. The Raiders' ships surrounded the station, their weapons charged. The standard procedure was to strike fast, disable defenses, and take whatever they wanted. But the station's response was anything but standard. Parker's shield modifications created unexpected energy feedback, damaging the first ship that fired. Turner's medical teams were so well prepared that crew injuries were minimal. Every human on board worked together like parts of a single machine, yet with a flexibility no machine could match. "Remarkable," Dr. Gray muttered, recording observations even as he helped reroute power to critical systems. "They're using the station's research equipment as defensive tools. They're turning their own fear into focused action." The Raiders' second wave hit harder. Alarms blared as hull breaches appeared on multiple levels. But for every system that failed, the humans found a way to adapt. They sealed off damaged sections, rerouted power, and kept fighting. "Doctor," Marcus called from his command post, "your antenna can detect energy signatures better than our sensors. We could use your help tracking their attack patterns." Dr. Gray hesitated. Direct involvement would violate every protocol his people had about maintaining scientific distance. But as he looked around at these humans, these emotional, illogical, remarkably brave humans, he realized he had stopped being just an observer long ago. He stepped up to the sensor station. "The Raiders' ships are forming a new attack pattern, but there's a weakness in their formation, if we time it right." The next few minutes proved why Raiders avoided attacking human stations whenever possible. Using Dr. Gray's insights and their own unpredictable tactics, the station's crew turned the battle around. The Raiders, faced with resistance they couldn't calculate or predict, finally retreated. As the all-clear signal sounded, Dr. Gray looked at his datapad. The High Council was demanding an explanation for his continued presence on a station they had ordered him to evacuate. For the first time in his life, the logical choice was clear. He deleted the message without responding. "So, Doctor," Marcus said, a tired smile on his face, "what data did you collect about humans today?" "Just one note," Dr. Gray replied. "Never tell humans the odds. They'll prove them wrong every time." Dr. Gray sat in his quarters, staring at the blank report screen. After the Raider attack, the High Council had given him one last chance to explain his actions. They wanted a final analysis of human behavior and a reason why he had chosen to ignore evacuation orders. He began to write. "Final report on human nature and behavior, by research observer Dr. Gray." The words felt wrong. He deleted them and started again. "What can be said of humans? A personal account." His antenna twitched as he continued writing. Every word went against his training, but he knew it was time to tell the truth. "When I first arrived at the Earth station, I believed humans were inefficient, illogical, and controlled by their emotions. I was wrong. Humans are not controlled by their emotions. They are empowered by them. Example: during the recent Raider attack, human fear did not cause panic. Instead, it sharpened their focus. Their anger did not make them reckless. It made them determined. Their hope did not blind them to reality. It helped them imagine solutions where none seemed to exist." A knock at his door interrupted his writing. Engineer Parker entered, carrying something in his hands. "Hey, Doc, We modified your research equipment, added some human touches. Parker set down what looked like a completely rebuilt scanner. Now it can detect emotional states and logical patterns at the same time. Thought it might help with your report. Dr. Gray picked up the device. His people would say it was ruined, but as he tested it, he found it worked better than before. Another perfect example for his report. He continued writing late into the night. He described the poker games where humans built trust through play. He wrote about their habit of making jokes during crisis situations, not because they didn't understand the danger, but because laughter helped them face it. Medical Officer Turner brought him food without being asked. "Can't write a good report on an empty stomach," she said. "That's human wisdom for you." He added that to his notes too, how humans took care of each other without logical reason, and how that caring made everyone stronger. Commander Marcus visited last, just as Dr. Gray was finishing his report. "How do you explain humans to beings who think emotions are a weakness?" Dr. Gray asked. Marcus thought for a moment. "Tell them about the station, about how we survived when pure logic said we should run, about how we turn our weaknesses into strengths." Dr. Gray nodded and wrote his final paragraphs. "My people believe that progress comes from removing emotion from the equation. Humans prove that real progress comes from understanding emotions, not suppressing them. We call humans illogical because they feel too much, but their feelings drive them to solve problems we wouldn't even try to fix. We call them inefficient because they spend time on friendship and fun, but these connections give them strength we can't calculate. In the end, what can be said of humans is this: they are not perfect. They are not the most logical, the strongest, or the most advanced, but they are the most alive. They don't just survive, they live. They don't just think, they dream. They don't just exist, they thrive. And most importantly, they teach others to do the same. I know this because they taught me." Dr. Gray sent the report to the High Council. Then he did something that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. He went to join his friends in the recreation area for what they called celebration. His antenna picked up the sounds of laughter and music down the corridor. None of it was logical or necessary. And for the first time in his life, that was exactly why he wanted to be there. 1 year had passed since Dr. Gray sent his report to the High Council. The Earth station had changed during that time. The observation post where he first watched humans was now a cultural exchange center. Young members of his species sat with human crew members, learning about emotions through what humans called movies and music. Dr. Gray stood at his favorite window, watching Earth spin below. His antenna picked up familiar footsteps. Commander Marcus approaching with news. "Your people's ship just docked," Marcus said. "Looks like your report started quite a debate back home." The ship carried the first official delegation from his world. After reading his report, the High Council had split into 2 groups. Some called for his immediate recall, claiming he had been corrupted by human influences. Others saw an opportunity to learn something new. The delegation leader, Senior Observer White, stepped through the airlock. His antennae were stiff with disapproval as he looked around the station. 3 younger observers followed him, their antennae moving with curiosity despite their attempts to remain properly logical. "Dr. Gray," White said formally, "we have come to evaluate the situation." "Of course," Dr. Gray replied. "Would you like to start with the traditional tour, or would you prefer to join our morning meditation session? Several of your younger observers have found it helps them process new emotional experiences in a controlled way." White's antenna twitched in shock. But before he could respond, one of the younger observers spoke up. "Is it true that humans use emotional bonds to increase problem-solving efficiency?" she asked. "Your report suggested that sharing feelings actually improves group performance. Why don't I show you?" Dr. Gray led them to engineering, where Parker was teaching his team a new repair technique. The humans didn't just explain the process. They encouraged each other, joked about past mistakes, and celebrated small successes. The younger observers' antenna moved with increasing interest as they watched the humans complete their task faster than any purely logical approach would allow. "Impossible," White muttered. "Their methods violate all standard protocols." "Yet they work," Dr. Gray said, just as my report described. Throughout the day, the delegation watched humans work, play, and solve problems. They saw Medical Officer Turner calm a frightened patient with nothing but kind words and a gentle touch. They witnessed the crew turn a routine maintenance check into a friendly competition that got the job done in record time. The younger observers grew more animated with each demonstration. Even White couldn't deny the results, though his antenna stayed stiff with resistance. That evening, during what humans called a welcome dinner, Engineer Parker approached the delegation with a proposal. "We've modified our training simulators to help your people understand emotions safely," he explained. "You can experience feelings in a controlled environment, learn how they work, then apply that knowledge to improve your own methods." The younger observers looked at White hopefully. After a long moment, he gave a slight nod. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "there is some logic in exploring new approaches." Dr. Gray watched as humans and members of his species began to truly interact for the first time. The younger observers were already showing signs of adaptation, their antennae moving in new ways, their voices carrying unfamiliar tones. "You know what the funny thing is?" Marcus said, joining him at his favorite window. "A year ago, you were studying us. Now we're all studying each other." Dr. Gray touched his station badge, now worn smooth by habit. "When I first arrived, I wanted to answer one question. What can be said of humans? Now I understand that the answer keeps changing. Humans never stop growing, learning, feeling, and they help others do the same." Below them, Earth continued its eternal spin. But on the station, something new was spinning too. A future where logic and emotion worked together, where different species learned from each other, where the universe became a little less divided and a little more alive. "So, Doctor," Marcus smiled, ready to write a new report. Dr. Gray's antenna moved in what humans would recognize as happiness. "No," he said. "Some things can't be captured in reports. They have to be experienced." And somewhere in the station, the sound of alien laughter mixed with human joy, creating a music that had never been heard before in the universe.